So you go on YouTube, you go on blogs, you go on podcasts, videos like this one, and everybody is telling you a million different things that you need to do, that you need to practice to become a better jazz musician. And it can get really overwhelming. And I know a lot of my students tell me they get overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. They don't know where to begin or how to improve and move forward. Well, I'm going to make everything simple. I'm going to boil everything down to my big 3 things that you need to practice for quicker jazz improvement coming right up. What's up? It's Brent from Learn Jazz Standards, which is a blog, a podcast, and videos all geared towards helping you become a better jazz musician. Hey, if you don't want to miss anything that's going on this channel, make sure you subscribe in this video below and you will be locked in to everything that is going on here. So the big 3 things that I suggest to all of my students to be practicing as jazz musicians are not just things that I've come up with. They're things that I have learned from studying with some of the best jazz musicians here in New York City, and my colleagues have done the same things. In my experience, these are the things that really pay off, because at the end of the day, we only have so much time to practice. We all have busy lives. We really want to make sure that everything we are working on is going to help move the needle in our jazz playing, and these big 3 things are what will do the trick. So without further ado, let's jump right into those one by one. The first item of the big 3 is technique. Now, have you ever seen those sushi chefs, carving up tuna, maybe carving up cucumber garnishes for sushi? It's really amazing how their technique works. I mean, they're incredible technicians with their knife skills. It's really an amazing feat to see. And, also, like, there's French chefs have a lot of technique as well, if you're more into that style of cooking. I mean, in general, there's so much technique that goes behind becoming a great chef, and they have to work on those skills in order to execute the recipes, execute these amazing tasting dishes. Well, it's the exact same thing when it comes down to jazz. Charlie Parker said it really well. You've got to learn your instrument, then you practice, and then when you finally get up there on the bandstand, forget all that and just wail. And I really like that last part about forgetting all that and just wail, but you can't do any of that without picking apart that first part, which is you have to learn your instrument. You have to learn the basic skills of your instrument in order to conquer that. So what things in technique should we be working on? Great question. Number 1 is instrument-specific things. So, a trumpet player, I'm not a trumpet player, but I know from my colleagues who are trumpet players that practicing long tones is important, but as a guitar player, I don't really need to do that. I need to be working on, things that will help me navigate my fretboard. There's so many different variations of things I can do on the guitar. So what you need to do is make sure you figure out things that are instrument specific to you that you need to be working on for technique. Now, the second thing is basics. Basics, knowing your scales, knowing your chords, how to play chord tones, things like this, fundamentals that are really important just to knowing your instrument and understanding how to navigate music. So make sure you have those going as well for you. Now, the other one I would suggest is patterns. And this one is something that I really do in my course, 30 Steps to Better Jazz Playing, is working on pattern exercises. And the reason I like pattern exercises is because they really work really well for all instruments, and they really help you navigate things and, gain this flexibility in your playing of things that you may not normally do. So I really do suggest pattern exercises. Here's an example of one right now. All right, item number 2 of the big 3 is jazz repertoire. You need to be learning jazz repertoire. One of my favorite things to do, one of my hobbies, is cooking. I love to do that. It's something I really find a lot of pleasure and enjoyment in. And I recently got a Julia Child's The Art of French cooking book. And, inside this book are hundreds and hundreds of different recipes that I can learn. And when I go through that, I can pick a recipe and learn it, understand it, and then learn another one. And slowly but surely, I'm building a repertoire of recipes that I know how to cook, right? I mean, that's how every single chef learns, is they start learning these different kinds of dishes that they can make. Well, it's the same thing with jazz musicians as well. One of my teachers that I studied with before, Peter Bernstein, once told me, let the tunes teach you how to play, because in those tunes are all the lessons that we need to learn. So we don't have to worry so much about all this theory and stuff right away. All we need to do is start digging into these tunes, and we're going to naturally start learning that stuff. And of course, how can you learn jazz unless you learn this standard repertoire, unless you know the songs? And regardless of whether you want to compose your own music, you can learn all those lessons in the tunes. So we need to be developing a repertoire. So learning jazz standards is really important. All right, item number 3 of the big 3 is jazz language. So here's the truth about when I cook these days. I've learned a bunch of different recipes, and all this stuff, but when I actually go to create a dish now, I actually don't usually follow a recipe. I just kind of I know some of the basics, the fundamentals, or the concept of making that dish, but I've stolen enough ideas from other chefs that I know how to make it my own. I can take some from this person's idea, from this person's idea of how to make a dish, and then just improvise myself, and then I finally am able to get it. And the truth is, I've done the same thing with jazz too. I've stolen from other jazz musicians, and as a result of that, I've slowly been able to build up my own sound and my own style. So we need to be doing the exact same thing. We need to be learning the jazz language, the same as when you were a kid, trying to learn how to speak your native language. You were mimicking your parents or mimicking other people who were speaking that language, and eventually you learned how to speak it, and then eventually you learned your own way of saying things. It's the same thing we got to do with jazz. So I like to separate it into micro and macro jazz language. Now, micro is more like licks, little phrases over chords or chord progressions. Things like these can help us understand how to approach certain chord progressions, like a 2-5-1 chord progression, which is found all over in jazz. So I suggest learning micro pieces of jazz language. I also suggest working on macro pieces of jazz language, which is like entire solos. Now, doing this is important because if you learn entire solos, you're able to see how an artist approached an entire jazz standard, and getting that overall, that bird's eye view of things can also be really helpful for understanding the language. These are the big three things that I think you need to be working on: technique, jazz repertoire, jazz language. If you just focus on those 3 things and try to make those a part of your practice sessions, you will have success, you will improve quicker, and you don't need to worry about all that other noise that is going on out there. All this noise is distracting us and not getting us to our jazz performance goals. So if you do want help going further with this, getting to your jazz performance goals, I suggest my free mini course called Accelerate Your Jazz Skills, 3 steps towards jazz improv freedom. It's completely free. You can sign up for it at accelerateyourjazzskills.com, and I go further into depth with the big 3 and how to set up a practice plan for success. All right, so here's what I want you to answer below. What do you think are the most important things that jazz musicians should be practicing, and what kind of stuff are you practicing right now? All right, answer that in the comments below. All right, I'm gonna sign off for now, but I will see you in the next video.